So I think we'll start. Welcome to this series of presentations. It seems one of the presenters is not here yet, so we'll start with the first two who are here, and if the third person comes, then he or she will have some time. If not, we'll have more time for discussion and questions. So my name's Claude Schreier. You've heard me a couple of times today already. So I'm actually a composer by background, and my day job is working at Canada Council for the Arts in Ottawa. I work at the Canada Council for the Arts in Ottawa as an arts administrator, and I have a practice as a soundscape composer. And I've been asked today to chair these sessions. So all I need to do is just remind the presenters that they have 15 minutes to present. And there are these pieces of paper here that probably won't be necessary, but if they are, we'll let you know so that we don't run too much over time. We've decided with the panelists to have the questions at the end, so there'll be the two presentations and then discussions, and I'll take speaking order if need be. I always like it when you speak to introduce yourselves so that we can get to know each other a little bit. And otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. I don't know either of these gentlemen. The session itself, if I can bring my phone back up here, I should know the theme.
Ecological awareness through listening.
Awareness, that's it. Ecological awareness through listening, which is one of the themes that was in the papers that were received that was selected. So I won't talk about that. I'll let the experts talk. So is Golan, it's nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
You have 15 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And
I'm going to put the microphone on you for the just for recording purposes.
Yes.
Put it in your pocket or. And normally I would love to have introduced you with your bio and everything, but I don't know. So I think it's in the book, in the program, so people can read it.
No problem. And because we have just 15 minutes, I will simply jump into my lecture, and I will be very happy to answer questions afterward with regard to specific paper, with regard to the context of my work on this topic, any issue that might be of interest.
Can everybody hear him clearly?
Is it better now?
It's not a microphone, that's only for recording, so you'll need to speak.
It's just for the camera.
Okay. Can you
Speak loudly.
Okay. In what follows, I explore aspects of the relationship between knowledge and science, and knowledge in and through the arts. In doing so, I will concentrate on art installations and projects dealing with sound and plants. I would like to begin by explaining the rationale behind my decision to focus specifically on this relation. In the first place, my decision stems from the perhaps misleading impression that plants would be an unlikely source of inspiration for musical and sound compositions. In contrast to human and animals, plants seem to be silent and undisturbed by the acoustic surrounding. Plants, it would appear, cannot hear, nor are they capable of producing sound except, of course, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. As the French author Francis Ponget famously wrote today, he refers to plants do not have a voice. They are almost paralytic. They can only attract attention by the posture. Secondly, and more importantly for my purpose, there have been many attempts to prove a causal link between sound and organic processes in plants, although the subject remains highly controversial. Justly or not, attempts such as these have been often criticized as being nothing but pure speculation and esoteric. Indeed, the whole idea that plants are capable of thinking and feeling is debated among philosophers and scientists. But within the realm of art, and this is one of the key points in my paper, seemingly unwarranted speculations may take on a positively connotated meaning. Viewed from this perspective, sound projects involving plants present then a fitting model for the examination of the relation between science and art precisely because they approach a field otherwise deemed difficult or impossible to fathom. It would be impossible to present here a comprehensive treatment of specific artwork or a consolidated theoretization of the issues at stake. Rather, I wish to raise some questions about what has been achieved and what could still be achieved when artists, and specifically sound artists, engage themselves with topics conventionally thought to belong to the field of natural science. The notion that plants are sentient seemed to gain popularity among wider audiences through Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird's bestseller, The Secret Life of Plants. In this book, the author also retell and reinforce some of the myths and speculations related to plants and sound, citing a handful of experiments using sonic vibrations and a diversity of musical repertoire from Indian ragas to Johann Sebastian Bach, violin sonatas, and George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. Rather than citing the book here, as I did in the printed version of my paper, I would like to show one excerpt for the movie based on it, a movie made in 1979. Although the makers of the film did not follow the exact examples of the book, the film likewise tried to reveal some of the secret musical life and sonic life of plants. There we go. Here what we see is an experiment allegedly made in the Soviet Union, trying to prove whether plants can feel, whether plants can think. Excuse me, something here. Something here is not working as it should have been.
For advanced
Okay, great.
technicians were asked to pass through a laboratory containing 2 living cabbage plants. One of the subjects has been instructed to destroy the plant which is not attached to the electronic instruments. Hours later, the technicians are asked to return to the scene of the crime. The evidence is clear. The remaining plant has correctly identified the assailant.
I brought this example just to show what sort of speculative thought is, what kind of speculative thought is around plants in cultural popular imagination. In recent years, however, in using new methods and technologies, discoveries were made that throw new light on bioacoustic communication in plants. A research conducted by a team at the University of Western Australia indicates that plants can locate sources of water by sensing vibration of water movement. Furthermore, sound may also serve as nature's way to connect plants with animals. According to recent findings, paleotropical carvinous plants use acoustic stimuli in the form of echo-reflecting structures that mirror the ultrasonic calls of bats. This effect allows bats to recognize their plant partner and allows for a mutualism in the form of fertilization of the plants with physis in exchange for roots. We will have to wait and see in what ways, if at all, such findings will inform artworks of sound. But an interest in scientific questions and findings has certainly established itself as a major focus of art making in recent years, a trend that has also affected artistic applications of plants. I would like now to turn to my first example of art project involving sound and plants. Tom Kubli, a sound artist and composer based in Berlin, produced a series of works dealing with organic material and plants. Here I'll mention 2 of these. Manger and Toised, you can see. As I have 2 pictures of that project. I will show them briefly, the second one as well. This is a kind of close-up on the work, and this one is from a more distant view. I will explain what we see here. This work, Manger at Toised, engaged sound in relation to organic material. The work consists of 3 helium hybrids plants, all genetically identical, according to the artist, that were placed within a gelatin mold. Each such mold contains in addition a loudspeaker playing a different kind of music or sounds. Music by Eric Satie, specifically Je n'en pas dit No. 3. Britney Spears, the song Lonely, and Ernst Jandl, famous sound poem Schutzgramm. The plants were enclosed within a transparent vitrine to create a sterile environment and were properly nourished. Since the plants were capable of growing in this environment, it was predicted that their roots would gradually reach the loudspeakers. At the same time, the texture of the gelatin mold was also subject to transformation. Depending on the temperature of the room, it became softer or firmer, drier or humid. This in turn affected the acoustic surrounding created by the sound waves and by extension by extension, possibly also the growth of the plants. While the experimental use of sound in Manger Troisette was somewhat playful in its intention, Kubli's joint work with the artist and biologist Klaus Fritze presents a more rigorous approach, one that nevertheless does not shy away from speculative thought. The project, this is the next project. Der Projekt Experimental Aufbau einer Expositionssystem zur Untersuchung der Klangrezeption von Vitro-Plants, or in short, Expositionssystem, consisted of an experimental construction aiming at exploring the potential sound reception of in vitro pepper plants. The construction was made of 5 bags. Each bag contained a smaller bag with a plant affixed to agar-agar at its base. The larger bags, enveloping the smaller ones, were filled with sterile water and loudspeakers at the bottom. The loudspeakers were connected to a DVD device projecting a series of sinus tones. Each of the 5 plants enclosed in the bag was exposed to a different sinus frequency, starting with 136 Hz, followed by an increase of 40 Hz, a numerical relation inspired by Hans Cousteau's theory of the cosmic octave. The stated goals of Expositionssystem was to examine whether sound can actually influence the growth of plants, and if so, to identify specific receptors of sound, Klangrezeptoren, in plants. Standing as an initiative for scientific collaboration with a research institute, the work eventually was displayed at a gallery in Cologne for a couple of months in 2005. According to Kubli, no definite research results could be achieved in this artistic experiment for the reason that an art gallery cannot offer the kind of highly controlled environment necessary for precise observation and documentation of natural processes. This problem is, of course, not unique only to this case. Even so, an interest in scientific questions among artists have become quite widespread in recent years, perhaps predictably widespread, and is also indicative of a broader trend that has been termed artistic research. Perhaps predictably, the concept of artistic research is not limited to artwork themselves, but extends to activities and texts that accompany or frame artistic creation. The literary scholar Corina Kadov clarified that artistic research focuses on research questions represented in artistic form and addressed in a paratext. A paratext might include any kind of an accompanying text, such as an exhibition description, booklet, book, blurb, and more. It follows from this that a prerequisite for artistic research is the formulation of a research problem and its clear presentation, typically in the form of a written text, such as one would expect in the case of a research proposal. Although the practice of reading theoretical treatises and delivering self-analysis of one's own art are not rare in the 20th and 21st centuries, artistic research assumes a systematic relation with scientific approaches, and a conceptual component is essential to their evaluation. Evidently, artistic production of this kind breaks with the hermetic concept of artwork in order to make room for scientific questioning, reflection, and clarification as integral part of art's aesthetic identity and processes of creation and explication. On this basis, I would like to propose that the term artistic research may apply to additional category of works, namely works that do not explicitly pursue a presentation or clarification of a research problem, but also aim at making a scientific problem and its potential solution a matter of public awareness and education. This brings me to my next example of a research-led sound art project engaging plants. Mylise Abson, or Mylise simply, is a British Los Angeles-based contemporary sound artist whose work has become famous for making music with plants. Inspired by Maurice Schaffer's ideas, one of her recent projects involved an interactive and technology-embedded eco-classroom she created at the Lycée International Français in Los Angeles. Though not completely isolated, I just want to show you 2 photos from this. This is the Eco classroom from the outside. She calls it BioLibrary from the outside, and this is the way it looks out from the inside. Though not completely isolated from its urban soundscape, the biolibrary, as she calls the project, creates an acoustic environment of its own. This acoustic environment includes the sound of water flowing and other audible elements typical of a rainforest. The sounds are activated when children are sitting, an effect that encourages them to engage in concentrated listening to nature. Touching the plants within the dome of the biolibrary triggers sounds of animals, while the presence of people within it is captured by the embedded sensors and results in emitting harmonic, sonic, and visual scapes. This way, the biolibrary functions as a, and I quote, calming and restorative acoustic sanctuary. It also, according to the artist, creates a space for wonder-driven exploration as children find a natural curiosity in the soil, insects, plants, and ponds creatures that drives them to learn about our biosphere. In this and in other projects, my list art is marked by a concern with the natural environment and the complex role of technology in our lives. In one of her interviews, she emphasized her commitment to raising awareness of environmental problems and the way our technology might be used toward achieving this goal. In one of these occasions, she referred to the need to create a new kind of symbiosis with nature. We must be around ecology for our physiological and psychological well-being. In the seeking and manifestation of this techno-utopia, which we are desperately trying to achieve, we have to create symbiotic systems with nature. This means that we need to move from a mentality of ownership of nature to a mentality of relationship with nature. And although technology is the driving force behind the exploration of the plant, it is also most likely the best hope we've got to rekindle our lost communion with our planet. Rather than exploring sound as an object of scientific investigation, my list art uses sound alongside visual and physical elements as means of creating utopias of symbiosis between nature and technology. Such artistically constructive environments aim at stimulating curiosity about nature and its scientific study, as well as creating visions for a new kind of relationship between technology and the biosphere. Art can be useful in this endeavor not just because it can facilitate the development of new uses for technology and perhaps also the development of new technologies themselves, but also because it is capable of making such synthesis the focus of our aesthetic experience and enjoyment. With this in mind, we could now address this on a broader level the question about the meaning and function of such art projects in perceiving and learning our natural environment. There is in search of the arts for meaningful ways to participate in a discourse of science reflect the extent to which the natural world, as understood from the viewpoint of science, became a major public concern. This would not have been possible without our present-day sensibility for environmental issues and our self-awareness as influential factors on the natural environment. This awareness has also implications for the field of aesthetics. According to the philosopher Wolfgang Welsch, the aesthetic experience is not an autonomous experience. Rather, the aesthetic experience transcends specific fields of knowledge and activity. I quote, "The basic aesthetic experience is not that art can be something that is self-contained, but rather that it opens one's eyes to unfamiliar aspects of the world. Works of art often create an intensified perception that radiates into reality." End of quote. Among other things, the experience of art allows us to see the world with new eyes, to expose new realities within the world in which we are living, and to serve as a means through which individuals and collectives could express themselves. The different ways in which art may serve as a medium of the world are not mutually exclusive. Even the same artwork or installation consent into motion, a combination of aesthetic and epistemological processes. Yet, it seems very likely that art projects engaging nature and science would be interested in the possibility of revealing and articulating new relations within existing observable reality. This applied to Kublis and Fritz's artistic investigation of the influence of sound on plants, as well as to Miley's attempts to motivate curiosity of a more general nature of our ecological surrounding. Without defining the kind of knowledge produced in these works in precise terms, it can nonetheless be said that by making new relations and connections present to the senses in an artistic way, they allow for new thoughts about knowledge and discovery in art to emerge.
We have 17 minutes now, but we have a bit of extra time.
Thank you. Questions about the potential impact of sound on plants, the question about the potential impact of sound on plants, the imperceptible relations between elements of the biosphere and the acoustic dimension of plants all present legitimate research problems. But in the context of art, they transform into a symbol, aiming at our sensory perception. This claim is, of course, not new. For contemporary thinkers, however, the challenge has been to make this and related observation fruitful for the understanding of modern art's claim to generate knowledge, including those art practices that identify themselves as artistic research. According to Dieter Mersch, the kind of knowledge conveyed by the art is bound to prioritize perception. We, I quote Mersch, identified showing rather than saying as the primary self-manifestation of the aesthetic. By showing and manifestation, we do not mean expression, but exhibition and exposition. Whatever works work only with aestheta, and relevance is drawn from perception of things and their materiality. End of quote. This by no means implies that the arts cannot project other conceptual forms of knowledge, but if the art, especially those that are no longer restricted by generic norms and traditional aims, are to maintain their identity as art, a question arises as to their unique mode of communication. The points can be further clarified if we think of artworks and installations as a medium with specific possibilities, potentialities, and limitations. Drawing on Niklas Luhmann's distinction between medium and form, Juliana Rebentisch recently proposed that the aesthetic uniqueness of intermedia art works lies not in specific conventions of genres and form, but rather in their function as a communicative medium. As Luhmann explains in his Art as Social System, the unity of the art resides in that it creates for the sake of observation and observes for the sake of being observed, and the medium of art consists in the freedom to create medium-formed relations. On this basis, we are able to reconceive the differences between art and science and the unique status of research-led artworks and installations. While the arts derive their unity from the constantly interplay between media and form, the medium of the sciences corresponds with the social distinction true-untrue. This does not exclude a meaningful relation between the two systems, but insofar as we observe art as art, and it, so to speak, observes us for the sake of observation, it is hard to abandon the distinction between it and real life, a distinction essential to the work of scientists. Art, Luhmann noted, does not search for islands of security from which other experience can be expelled as fantastic or imaginary or rejected as a world of secondary qualities of enjoyment or pleasure or common sense. This insight implies not only that different kind of forces are at stake in the making of art, but also explains why scientific experiments under the support of art may be of interest, regardless of acceptable criteria of evaluation applicable in the science, such as precision of measurement, numerical accuracy, and proven results. To sum up, research-led art and artistic research experiments may put on display a genuine scientific problem, but the artistic character ultimately draws the attention back to the formal and medial character and potentialities, unless, of course, paratexts are taken to be independent products. Here I focus on plants and their use in sound art to show that speculative thought of the kind reflected in the myth and stories retold in The Secret Life of Plants, whether in the book or in the film, does not necessarily pose a problem when transposed to the realm of art. Additionally, thinking of plants and engaging with them in the context of art may also advance new ideas about our place as humans within the natural world. At the same time, recent discoveries in biology and bioacoustics have shown that there is more to sound in plants than was so far assumed by the scientific community. The rediscovery of this dimension, though not in depth to works of art, nonetheless hints at a potential ground for future and exchange between the arts and the sciences, however much they differ from one another in effect, goal, and medium. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Golan. I'll ask Robin Parmar to come up, please. I assume that C. Borbach is still not here, so he or she. Do we know? Does anybody know he or her? No? So we just won't have the presentation. So, Robin, you can take the 15 or a bit more time, and then there will be quite a bit of time for questions.
You know how to. You do now?
Hopefully I can do it with...
Yeah, we'll just need to put the microphone on him.
Oh, right.
do it like this. There we go.
Just for recording purposes.
Sure.
I'll put it here for you. Feel like I'm a stage manager.
And not for the first time, I imagine.
Okay, so Robin, the floor is yours.
Right, so I'm going to bring the noise in more ways than one, I think. I have to apologize for the terrible condition in which I present myself to you. I'm augmented by a virus that is making the rounds in Ireland, where I'm from, hence a bit of biographical detail. Listening to this presentation, I kind of wish that I'd done a different one to tie in with that, because I'm very interested in this idea that of ourselves as ecosystems, although I don't really like that term anymore. This truism that most of the cells in our body are not human cells, and that the parasite on my cornea and the flora in my gut and the virus doing whatever the heck it's doing with me the last week are all equally important, perhaps, constituents of this thing that just looks like me. I have my mother's cells in me as cells with her genetic code. And if you are a mother, you have your child's cells in you as well. So if someone takes your genetic code, there's a chance they'll get an incorrect match. Also, there's increasing evidence that we exchange these cells between ourselves externally. So there's a lot of strange nature going on out there, which I might come back to at the very end of this talk. So this is not that talk. This is kind of a boring talk. It's a footnote in a way for me, but a very important one. I am working at the Digital Media Arts Research Center. I hate the word digital. I'm not so fond of arts and research I can handle, and center I don't like either. But, you earn a crust. I'm going to read. And I did actually write this to 20 minutes, so I'll try to abbreviate it slightly as I go. So for
I think you're fine at 20.
Yeah? I was either misinformed or I misunderstood when I put this together. I write too much anyway. For 12,000 years since the last major glacial period, our species has been living in the Holocene. In this epoch, Homo sapiens has transitioned from a hunter-gatherer society to one based on fixed settlement agriculture. This allowed for efficiencies in food production, leading to exponential increases in population and concomitant urbanization. These changes have placed unprecedented stresses on the Earth system, which is to say the entire complex of biotic and abiotic agents that make up our closed planetary system. Physically closed, obviously open to sunlight. As the current millennium began, it was proposed that a new epoch be declared. The Anthropocene marks the central importance of human activity in species decline, biogeochemical alterations, geomorphic modifications, and climate change, the last of which we hear all too much about. So this is, we've been aware of this for some time, probably in our field, I hope. Maybe we had a heads up. I know that since I was cognizant, I've been involved with sort of non-centrist, egalitarian, green, whatever activities, because it's been evident that this is important. And I think from now on, it's the only thing I really want to devote myself to, because if you have children or even friends' children that you kind of like a little, it becomes kind of important what happens to their lives, if not to our own. This is an incredible piece of art, which I wish I could discuss, by a French photographer. The credits are at the end, though. So yeah, I'm going to bring the noise, in part because I keep coughing through everyone's presentations, which is, that disruptive form of noise that does annoy. And I have had, thank you, several people offer me lozenges already. They just don't work at the moment. And also because I think noise is a generative, antagonistic, but also generative structure. I thought I really need to look at R. Murray Schafer's writings. I need to go back to the Soundscape and the two pamphlets that preceded it. There were more than two, but two are pertinent. And see what remedies to the Anthropocene I could find there. And the answer was none, unfortunately. I went in optimistic, as a scientist would. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read Schafer against 5 concepts of nature. And these are not definitive. These are 5 I use and that other people use. They're sort of my terms. There's probably others. I won't belabor this slide because they'll be mentioned in turn as we need to. So, I mean, as we know, Schaeffer first introduced the term soundscape in the ear cleaning pamphlet, though usually that one's not mentioned. People skip right over to the next one, which was called the new soundscape, which is when he started using the term more in the sense that we would expect from him and from our own practice. But what was in the new soundscape that he elided from the book to follow was the source of the term in John Cage. On page 1 of the pamphlet, Schaeffer describes how John Cage replied to his request for a definition of music with the following: music is sounds around us whether we're in or out of concert halls, cf. Thoreau. So this definition forms the crux of the book, really, used as the justification for considering the soundscape, which is to say the entire sonic environment, as a musical composition. And Schaeffer examines two roles in relationship to the soundscape. He tasks the music educator with studying and understanding the soundscape, and entreats the composer to collect the most exciting sounds. Unwanted sounds, such as that specifically of automotive traffic, are classified as noise because they are repetitive and ultimately boring. I won't do lots of scare quotes. I have like 55 references, and if I did that, it would be really boring. But all these words are not my own. The whole paper you can read. They're repetitive and ultimately boring. And here is a contradiction already in Schaeffer's formulation. Despite opening the world of music up to sounds heretofore heard only outside the concert hall and considering them as music, the sounds themselves continue to be judged by aesthetic criteria established by European art music. And this was still Schaeffer's position later, and obviously it comes out of his own practice, although as we just heard, it doesn't encompass all of his practice. There's a great amount of practice that sort of contradicts his writings, or at least seem to come from two different Murrays at least. So which sounds should form our compositions? Time and again, Schaeffer prioritizes those from pastoral settings. Winds, water, birds, animals, thunder is one series. The rationale for this goes back to Thoreau. Walden, which represents itself at least as a diary of a retreat from the urban to the solitary and frugal existence. In this setting, the author experiences in the sounds and sights of nature an inexhaustible entertainment, as Schaeffer himself notes. A typical passage, which is reproduced in the written version, marries Christian virtue, the bells tolling on Sunday, the day of rest, Greek mythology, the wood nymph articulating the song of the trees, classical music, the harp as exemplar of vibratory phenomena, and classical cosmology, the universal lyre playing the music of the spheres. That's all in one paragraph in Walden. Thoreau valorizes both the sounds of nature and the music of antiquity. Schaeffer is in accordance, allowing also the sounds of, quote, townscape men's voices, their laughter, and the sound of their handicraft industries, end quote. So these are placed in opposition to sounds found after the Industrial Revolution. So I choose this image, well, for three reasons, but one is because not after the Industrial Revolution, but anyway. And after the Industrial Revolution, mechanical sounds drowned out both human and natural sounds with their ubiquitous buzz and whir, according to Schaeffer. But there's no obvious truth value in that statement. We can accept it or not. I mean, if you've read Hillel Schwartz's massive tome, Making Noise, you realize that people have always complained about noise right back to the very first writings in Babylon. So, yeah, and the labeling of particular sounds as noise is instead more a moral judgment based on social difference and privilege. We can read more about that in the book of which this was the cover, the Atali book. There's issues with placing some dividing line at the Industrial Revolution. Schaeffer's nostalgic yearning is typical of a romantic Weltanschauung, a reactionary stance against the materialist views of the Enlightenment. By 1977, with the publication of The Tuning of the World, it really became Schaeffer's dominant position. The first chapter of the book, The Natural Soundscape, contains poetic evocations of the sea, beginning with classical literature, including Homer. And then in just 3 pages, he cites Thoreau again, Somerset Maugham, Thomas Mann, Virginia Woolf, the poet Giovanni Pascoli, and painter Emily Carr. This catalogue of artists demonstrates that, for Schaeffer, nature functions as a wellspring of aesthetic inspiration, a source of the sublime. But as anthropologist Philippe Descola succinctly stated, Romanticism invented wild nature and propagated a taste for it. In this country, in fact, in Germany, the very first park was created from a group of artists who came together and decided they wanted a park. They wanted a sublime place. To further explore the Romantic ideology, which we probably know far too much about already, and which we know Schaeffer's been criticized on those grounds already, I want to look at prior concepts of nature, starting with Aristotle. I mean, nature is a contested term, and there are many definitions of it. It comes from the Greek natura, signifying the essential quality or innate disposition of a person or thing. And in English, we still use nature in this sense when we talk of human nature or the nature of something. Aristotle preferred the word physis or physis, which means to grow, which I think is lovely. And he used this as the title of his physics. Of course, now we think physics is a very different thing, but it actually is a growth industry, not industry. So Aristotle used it as the title of his Physics, a book that described, quote, the different forms of life and the structural relations that they share within an organized whole, which might sound familiar from more recent work in ecology. In the Aristotelian view, humans are similar to growing plants and the remainder of the cosmos, since these constituent parts are always in motion, always changing. And he contrasted the physics with the metaphysics, the study of mathematics, the immutable heavens, and the unmoved mover, which is to say God, none of which move. So those things don't move or change. So what I find most important about this is that Aristotle defined an inclusive nature that integrates our species with the life and the forces around us, something which was almost immediately forgotten, in fact, and remains mostly forgotten, because by the time of the Romans, a new dichotomy had been established. The cities, towns, and agricultural lands together formed the domus, which you can barely see, gray on gray, the domain of civilization. This territory had been carved from the silva, the primal European forest, a place filled with wild beasts, wild men, and danger. The word silva forms the root in Romantic languages for all that is apart from society, hence the English savage, the French sauvage, and so on. So savage literally means of the primal forest. And it's in that sense that various indigenous cultures, for example, the occupants of North America, were named when European colonists first apprehended them. So it meant they were of the forest. It wasn't necessarily a pejorative term initially. But the differentiation of nature into domus and silva is a product of Western European cultures. This dual is, and other cultures actually, but it's not universal. For example, it doesn't exist for the North American First Peoples. As an anthropologist, again, Descola, whom I draw on quite a bit, warns against applying concepts such as this to societies for which they're inappropriate. But I find that Schaeffer makes this very error, and this is great coming after the concert we heard actually on the North. He opposes an originary quietude to an industrial noisescape, and then imposes this reading on the Inuit and other peoples of the north of northern Canada. And I will read this quote because it's important, and we heard some of the sounds of the snowmobile. So Schaeffer writes, the destruction of the quiet northern winter by the jamming of snowplows and snowmobiles is one of the greatest transmogrifications of the 20th century soundscape. For such instruments are destroying the idea of north that has shaped the temperament of all northern peoples and has germinated a substantial mythology for the world. The idea of north, at once austere, spacious, and lonely, could easily throw fear into the heart, but it could evoke intense awe, for it was pure, temptationless, and silent. And later in the book, he says, the Canadian winter used to be noted for its purity and serenity. It was part of the Canadian mythology. The snowmobile has bitched the myth. Without a myth, the nation dies. It's like, yeah, don't hold back. Don't hold back. So, I mean, there's a few things need clearing up here, probably. A mythology of nationhood, first of all. It could readily serve those who wish to bulwark the state against dissent, both inside and out, to extend its hegemony. So I think it's important to consider whose myth Schaeffer's talking about, and the idea of North, as us Canadians will know, is the name of a 1967 radio documentary by Canadian pianist Glenn Gould, part of the Solitude trilogy, and a wonderful piece of work. A piece that uses a contrapuntal technique to weave 5 voices, each telling of their northern experiences, and listening to it, giving attention to its form and content and purpose for broadcast. It seems unlikely Gould was attempting any myth-making with this piece, probably quite the contrary. It's a multivalent work. Neither is it probable that Schaeffer means this passage to be read in terms of imperialism, especially given contrary statements elsewhere in his book. Nonetheless, it's clear that his mythology of the North is a creation of the South based on the work of composers, himself and Gould, trained in European art music. So it's still quite problematic. When Schaeffer characterizes Inuit life as originally pure, one with nature, temptationless and serene, before it was contaminated by industrialization and the colonists, he really basically recapitulates the archetype of the noble savage, first encountered in John Dryden's play from 1672, but also pictured in this Canadian work of art there. There's the noble savage. I mean, in his defense, Schaeffer applies the same reading to North American cultures in the main. So it's not so much that the Inuit in particular have been tainted by industrialization, because we all have. Now, I won't spend as long on this as I do in the paper. I just think it's important to contrast this view with that of artists from the North. This is Pitts Celiac, and this is not a very good rendering of this. There's a show I saw in the Art Gallery of Ontario this summer that contained several works from artists from Nunavut and other areas, I think, or maybe all Nunavut, I can't remember. So this morning commute from 2015 is a pastel drawing of hunters checking their nets in the early morning, the rising sun painting the sky, and it could easily be interpreted as a romantic image in the European tradition, with the hunters silhouetted boldly, except that so are their snowplows. The snowmobiles are rendered in the same fashion. The technology is not alien nor disruption, but it's facilitation. In fact, the vehicles fit their landscape. That's the Inuktitut word for north, by the way. So there's our word, English word for north, Inuktitut word for north, and rendered in the Canadian Aboriginal syllabics, which is my favorite script in the world. It's just so incredible, because you can rotate letters to form new sounds. It's the only geometrically, it's really cool. Anyway, I won't talk about this picture, but I love this picture. The 2 walruses with the GoPro camera just inserted into frame. It was quite amazing to see this stuff in a gallery. I won't talk about this now, unfortunately. But my point is that this is all part and parcel of this artist's life as an artist and a hunter, using these cameras and these tools. There's no real sign of bitching the myth anywhere. It's even hard to locate where the myth might be. The myth is not their myth. It's one that's created for them. Okay. So Schaeffer's phrase, pure, temptationless, and silent, evokes the myth, another myth, the myth of Genesis. The first book of the Hebrew and Christian Bibles tells us that humans, while not divine themselves, bear the form of the divine, since they are made in God's image. When Adam is given nominative power over the animals, our right to dominate other species is established. Compared with Aristotle's inclusive formulation of nature, the Abrahamic ideology is exclusive, placing humans outside and superior to nature. Genesis also gives us an original place, the Garden of Eden, and it's useful to note, since I like definitions, that the English word garden, derived through Germanic roots from the Latin hortus gardinus, means a cultivated enclosed area, and our word paradise derives from paradisa, a Persian word that means an enclosed orchard. So they both actually mean exactly the same thing. They're etymologically synonymous, garden and paradise. Jedediah Purdy has a book in which he traces an ideology of husbandry through the history of the United States of America. This is one of the most fantastic paintings ever, because you've got progress actually unspooling a telegraph cable. The telegraph and the train being the two main technologies that brought progress to the Usonian West. And of course, you've got the native people cowering in darkness and fear, running away, and the bear not looking very happy either. Bit of a wardrobe malfunction, I might point out, but anyway. So in Purdy's book, and in many examples, he shows how the ideal state, for at least the United States, is related to husbandry, the careful tending and reshaping of nature to our will. Without this valuable work we do, we have only wilderness, a place of danger and misfortune of wild animals and savage people. The savages of the Americas, like the Gauls of Europe, live outside the domus, but Usonian providence extends this ideology beyond anything the Romans might have understood. According to Abrahamic teleology, savages are considered barren and unproductive since they are unwilling to yield to the inevitable God-given march of progress. The exclusive ideology of nature, then, is cognate with this mode of domination, congruent also with a capitalist enterprise that encourages exploitation of resources, growth at any cost. I mean, it's no surprise that the United States of America is both hyper-capitalist and a fundamentalist Christian country. When I keep saying Usonian, that's a really good term when you don't want to say American to mean just people who live in one small part of the Americas. Anyway, unfortunately, this ideology exists in Schaeffer in the sense that he assumes that sound exists to do our bidding and are not properly composed until they do so. So they're material that we have to tend, like the sonic garden. When parks were established in the USA, they replicated the function of Roman groves. Yosemite National Park and Mount Rushmore are example of parkland created with specific utilitarian functions, romantic justifications, and explicit evocations of Eden in their startup documents. And in chapter 18 of the Soundscape, Schaeffer makes a similar proposal. His Soniferous Garden is to be an acoustically designed park with a paradoxical goal to let nature speak for itself. And this is, of course, done once again through the mediums of water expressing the inmost vital principle of the whole, and wind, the transcendental breath of the pneuma. So once again, the text is replete with appeals to literature and ends with a call for silence so that visitors may hear the ringing of the great orbs of the music of the spheres. So obviously Schaeffer's garden is not achievable in practice, but it'd be kind of cool if it was. I want to go and hear the ringing of the spheres. But it is a symbolic reconstruction of a lost ideal, an Eden of the imagination. And it highlights for me the limitations of soundscape as a concept. Explicitly derived from the tradition of landscape painting, the term frames nature as a subject we can study or enjoy, but then immediately forgets that it is a frame constructed within a cultural context, valorizing a particular relationship of subject to viewer or listener. Schaeffer's formulation leaves under-theorized the social, ideological, or political positionalities of listeners. Furthermore, as Tim Ingold has famously noted, the concept of the soundscape divides our integrated sensory apprehension of the world into individual delimited sensory registers. To see the world as a soundscape is a reductive process. I won't talk about ecology. Except the quote from David Tupe when he said, "Distant ambulance sirens may be one person's purgatory and another's poetry." So I won't talk about ecology. Wow, this is hard to do when my throat's killing me. So what I've tried to do is what I tried to do initially for me was an experiment. I thought, what can I find in Schaeffer that can help us in the Anthropocene in this horrible time we find ourselves? And instead, what I found was that his writings on the Soundscape, and I'm just restricting myself to those specific like written works. I'm not talking about anybody else's works that came after that, even immediately after that or synchronous with it. I had to have some constraint here. I found it leveraged two problematic ideologies of nature: the romantic nature, the idea that nature is a wellspring of aesthetic and spiritual inspiration, so it basically serves us. I mean, and that form of nature was created by us in the first place, so it's a lovely harmonic balance we have there with it in that sense. And providential nature, that nature is our birthright, a storehouse of raw resources set aside for human cultivation, even if those are only sonic resources. And both concepts are founded in the myth of the primal garden, a paradise that we have corrupted. And they are predicated on a split between domus and silva that arose with agricultural settlement in much, but not all, of the world. And what's troubling is that Schaeffer sometimes mobilized these ideologies without adequate consideration for the cultural contexts within which they were created, or could be created for, hence the snowmobile example. And essentially the error is one of treating symbolic constructions of nature as universals, projecting them onto contexts for which they're sometimes a poor fit. But lest this current analysis also be guilty of decontextualization, it's important to remember, and we know this, but I'm actually giving this paper to people who will not know this as well. Paper to people. The fact that the Schaeffer's Soundscape is now 50 years old, the product of a specific Canadian situation and concerns with noise abatement. Since that time, his texts have performed a valuable function, as we well know, catalyzing the imagination of practitioners of every stripe: composers, radio producers, field recordists, anthropologists, urban planners. I'm 3 out of 5 of those. But his singular contribution requires, as adequate response, continuing critical engagement and debate. In a letter published in the second issue of the Journal of Acoustic Ecology, so the very first letters page, Peter Cusack questioned the sweeping assumptions of the growing field and lamented the lack of lively disagreement, alternative theory, polemic even. Coincidentally, his letter was published the same year that the Anthropocene was proposed as a label for our epoch. And in the 18 years since, I think we can agree on this, our times have become more desperate, more extreme, and less comprehensible. It's time to develop a sustainable praxis of listening and transduction, one which is free of the thinking that brought us to this brink. And I think I can say that naturalism has failed us. And we might return to Aristotle and reconsider our embedded situation in a matrix of connections and flows. And there's some concepts, like concepts of the preternatural and of the immanent, that I think are very interesting in this regard. Writers going all the way back to Epicurus, but also Bateson, Deleuze, Delanda, and many others. Cyborg theory as well, which I didn't mention here. So I consider this paper to be a historical footnote to that work that's already ongoing. Thank you. Illustrations.
And I want to apologize, Ebola, I misunderstood that it was actually 20 minutes the time you had, so I rushed you a bit. Hope that's okay.
Oh, it was? Okay.
The numbers on my head.
I was right.
First, the numbers. 15, maybe even 20 minutes for questions and discussion. I'd really be interested to hear what you have to say in response to these presentations on the theme of ecological awareness through listening. And do you have questions of each other before we start? Okay, well, go ahead.
I mean, should I stand or
Yeah. And how do we deal with the mic? Do we continue to do the questions, or are we done on recording?
You can just put the mic on the table and it's like that.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Just come.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robin, for this talk and for this critical reading of Schaeffer and the contextualization of ideas. One point that you made at the end, on which I found very interesting, and I would like to hear more, is you said naturalism had failed us. What could you perhaps be more precise about naturalism?
the quick waves, yeah, well, that would take, yeah, again, every word has so many meanings and definitions.
There's a bar for that.
I think the idea of externalizing nature and making it something observable and fully knowable in concept. Not sure if that's naturalism. It's part of it. Naturalism, rather, not naturism. Naturalism. So it would be that aspect that, as opposed to not just seeing ourselves as part of nature, but not even needing the term nature would be preferable. And I think actually in Aristotle and other early writers, there were elements of that, like not even needing the divisive terms in the first place. So like I don't use the term soundscape for pieces I do, because I consider actually that's a different way of approaching it. Like, what does the term add to your practice? Like, what if you just took that word out of what you did? I mean, I think 50 years ago it was a necessary term because it marked a difference. But now, I think it's
a good point.
I never go to a concert and it's like it's a soundscape concert, and I never come away thinking that was different than if it wasn't a soundscape concert.
And what is the problem? Sound or the wood or the
scaping.
Scaping.
Well, for Ingold, the scaping is the problem. He actually uses that word, the scaping of everything, he says. He's against the scaping of everything. Because landscape painting, which Schaeffer says that's where he got the term from, is a particular way of conceiving the world that comes from rules of perspective and how it's going to be framed, the audience it's created for, the culture it came from, the elite aspect of it. And you can't engage in something and forget all of that.
Well, let's hear what does anybody have questions or comments on that? And do you want to just introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
At the front, am I the first one?
Yeah, it looks like it is.
My name is Milana. I'm from Vancouver. Thank you both for fantastic presentations. I'm really excited to see a session on the Anthropocene. I teach sound studies in Simon Fraser University, the home of Schaeffer and Barry.
Carrying a big burden.
I'm carrying.
Yeah.
I'm tired. Yeah.
It's a legacy.
It's a big legacy. Yeah, it's a big legacy, and I am so excited to be polemic, in the words of Peter Celiac. So I was really stimulated by both of your presentations, and I want to ask a question of both of you to comment on. So there has been this, and you alluded to it, this progression in art to do a lot of, it's not exactly sonifying, it's technically audifying the unknowable of nature, right? Like the putting contact mics on leaves, or dropping down hydrophones, Leah Barclay's work that, hears the lives of critters, or, what does it mean? How does that create knowledge, and what does that imply for the Anthropocene? And what does it mean that we get to connect to nature, but only if we really dig into it deeper with technology?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I myself a bit think. Artists can do whatever they want and formulate whatever goals they have in mind, and it's all good and well and legitimate. There is no point of criticism here. The only point that can be made nonetheless is that it may not lead to the kind of knowledge that we accept from research proper. And that was my point. There is no clear line between the two, but still it's not the case that the one can be replaced by the other. And the kind of knowledge that is being used using these methods, and again, this can be changed from one artwork to the other, from one installation to the other. It depends on, eventually it is a question of specific content and the specific use of the method, but generally speaking, it seems to me that the general effect of such applications is mainly to draw the attention of people into something that they didn't know before that exists. Beyond, however, providing them with the kind of knowledge that they could then put into scientific use.
Sorry, what was the question? I remember the gist, but the targeted question,
well,
like,
what does it mean for some of art's claims that that art can connect us to nature in these technological ways where we're hearing the unknowable or the unhearable or the unobservable, but we're doing it through technology, and there's this idea that we're like that it's possible to really like get in there and dig really deep. And I want to hear you comment on the other talk from the position of the
well, I don't think
the issues that you brought up.
yeah, I mean, the technology is not a problem because we always investigate everything with technology, even if it's only language, which is the most complicated technology of all. So the technology is not a problem. It becomes, well, I teach at Digital Media Arts Research Center, and it becomes, I guess, the exploratory practice of 10 years ago becomes the cliche of today, and every like fourth year student is doing similar things. Not a problem if it's something for them, and if it gets them to a different place as well, and if it gets their specific community of listeners to a different place, there's always new ears to open in that sense. And so I think, yeah.
But aren't we again in the position where we are operating on nature? We're performing surgeries for our own betterment? Like, what is the
No,
for the
no.
relationality?
No, we're not. No. Because there's no division. I mean,
But nature
nature's performing
observing us.
surgery on me right now. It's just like, I don't see it has to be cast in that way. I think that sort of confrontational approach to the Anthropocene is and will fail to produce any solutions, because it actually comes back to looking at nature as a resource, and is it behaving or is it not behaving, and are we behaving in respect to it or are we misbehaving? But it's still this dialectic. I don't find, now it could be that I need to look into it more, there could be great solutions, but I don't see that casting it in that antagonistic dialectic really gets us anywhere. For me, personally.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name
If
is
anybody
Peter.
else wants to jump in, just go ahead and have
My name
dialogue.
is Peter. So I just need to be clear what you understand with Anthropocene. Because I just heard, you quoted a little bit Deleuze, that the Anthropocene can be used in completely different ways. The Anthropocene can be used that we are in an age where the human race is in the center of the world. And on the other hand, it can be used that it's completely opposite, that we have to understand that we are the same as the nature and as the world. So I'm not completely clear about this.
I was using it in the technical sense as defined by geographers, basically. So it's the error. It is the error. It's the era in which I can't find it. The Anthropocene marks the central importance of human activity in species decline, biogeochemistry, alterations, geomorphic modification, climate change.
Okay.
So it's actually a very specific thing. So there's these four, all of them vast
Yeah.
areas of study, and it's our central role in that. In other words, we have not the only role, but a role that would appear to be the main one. I mean, which is why.
But this is exactly, I heard exactly the opposite. And it's not really that we endanger the world. The world will survive without that. We endanger ourselves. And with this understanding, it's a completely different understanding of the Anthropocene. We have to understand that we are not on the other side of the wall, and there is nature and here is mankind.
No, I agree. That's why I stated our central importance. Not that the world will end if something doesn't happen. I mean, I hope I didn't make any apocalyptic statements, because I
You
don't.
implied a couple.
I probably implied a couple. I might have been verging towards some apocalyptic statements there. But I mean, it's a subtle thing, I agree with you, and it's hard to talk about, and I'm no doubt making errors even in attempting to, because it's very hard to say, to go through 5 like ideologies of nature in like 20 minutes to begin with, when each one occupies a row of books. So I guess I'm performing the task of the synthesist, not someone that plays a keyboard with MIDI controller, but the other type of synthesist. Yeah.
You're also provoking a debate, right?
I'm provoking a debate,
to
yeah.
question Schaefer is not a bad thing, because anybody can be questioned in a respectful way critically, looking at how terms have evolved over time and what they mean, you know. In Canada right now, there's a lot of talk about cultural appropriation, in particular with Indigenous arts. Where I work at Canada Council, it's a very complex issue. Who does art belong to? How are words used, you know? I think it's good. Both of your questions that you're asking are really good, and I think that's what this conference is meant to do, is raise those issues, because in 5 years, when we meet again, you know, this kind of gathering, we'll have had time to work on it, think about it, but at least some ideas are planted in our minds and our listening ears. Sorry, go ahead, and just introduce yourself, and then you can go after, please.
I'm Juliana Bastos from Brazil. And congratulations to both of you for the great works. I want to ask to Robin about, you are from Limerick, Ireland?
Yes.
Yes, I want you to tell us about it. How is the Schaefer's work is mostly understood and applied in Ireland? Because in Brazil, we consider very much this first part of the studies, the acoustic ecology studies, and we got stuck in a utopian panorama, wanting to reach the second, the acoustic project, but by cultural context and another issues about Brazilian culture and history, we cannot reach that. Do you understand?
Yes.
So my question is, how this happened in Ireland? How the Schaefer's work?
It didn't happen at all. It didn't happen in Ireland at all.
No?
No. I grew up in Canada, and from actually quite an early age, I knew of R. Murray Schaefer, because when I was young, I played viola and I was in orchestras and stuff. And he premiered a piece in London, Ontario, which is where I was from, in about 76. Can't think of which piece that would be. But he actually premiered one there. And I vaguely knew about it. I was in high school, but you know, people are going to rock concerts, but I vaguely knew about this instead. But I didn't know enough to go. But then when I started working in community radio, everyone just sort of knew who R. Murray Schaefer was. I kept hearing about R. Murray Schaefer this, R. Murray Schaefer that, and I've told this story before, because when I went to actually look up some of the writings, I was looking for R. Murray Schaefer. I thought, what a great name. You know, his first name means a place you store munitions. That's great. So
I think it's Robert Murray, isn't it?
So, I mean, I think I was blessed, actually, because it was actually just in the water, like his stuff. And we would regularly do radio stuff, like later on I learned Hildegard Westerkamp was doing in Vancouver Co-op Radio, the other side of the country, where we would just stick a microphone out the window, or I would record the hour before my radio program. And then the tape was over, cassette tape, and I would just flip it over and then just play it, so you get to hear what happened the previous hour, like a little time machine, I called it, and stuff like that. So, for us, it was, we had nothing to work through. We were just doing our practice. It was just part of our practice, and we weren't engaging with the ideas as such. We weren't thinking about it on a philosophical level. I think we already might have had some problems if we were. And very much if you take it into a totally new cultural context, I think you would have to have problems because of the unstated assumptions that I sort of alluded to or drew out slightly in my talk. But in Ireland, I don't think any of that happened. I mean, I know plenty of people there making field recordings, and there's actually artistic contributions here from other practitioners in Ireland. I think I'm the only one who actually came this time. but it wasn't specifically about him, actually. I think it had already diffused at that point. His work, his ideas already diffused out enough before, yeah.
You want to speak?
Yes, just I'm definition also from museum. I would comment about Anthropocene, and I would like to remember there's an author, Yanomami author, it's Davi Kopenawa. I don't know if you know this person. He's from the Yanomami tribe, and please remember us. There are different kind of humanity, of mankind. And we are different. And he said on this book, La chute du ciel, the fall of sky. He said we are the society of stuff. And I would like to provoke us. Our art nowadays are really connected with electricity, which doesn't work without iron. And iron you find on the forest. In Brazil, you find the forest. 2 years ago, a huge iron plant was collapsed and destroyed a huge river, Ludosi. And it's just to remember us, we are different mankind. So maybe the question is what our culture is. It's unsolved, you know. I don't know how to solve this problem. It's an anti-utopian talk. I think it's an unbroken problem. I mean, art with plants, but using electricity with iron is a countersense.
When you say iron, do you mean like the metal iron?
Yes, the metal. We can't make any other art nowadays without iron, and iron destroys completely other mankind. That's what David Kopenawa said on his book. I don't know
when you say different culture, different from what? In the sense that the Stone Age or the Bronze Age was different in this sense?
No, they exist nowadays. We are. I don't think in historical. This is to think in historical levels. But we are contemporary to them. They are living. They have point of views about us.
It's 6:23 and we have another event at 6:30, a reception, and this was supposed to end at 6:15, but I don't want to cut it off if someone else has something to say. Are there any other questions or comments before we wrap up this session? Peter?
Probably not to discuss it to extent, but I really wanted to give another idea of artistic research, because I'm not agreeing. Probably we don't have the time to discuss it now, but it is a little bit related to the opening monologue talk, discussion, dialogue, which you, as you said, a fantastic thing. It's that you can talk and talk and talk and talk, but you have to experience the listening. And then there's a question how we produce knowledge, and what is knowledge? And is knowledge only transferred here by a fantastic book and images, or do we have other ways to get in contact or even to communicate or transfer knowledge? And I think that artistic research, not every art is artistic research, but artistic research can ask questions which have some questions to the world to get inside and communicate with means which are not text and not speech. And I think we can gain knowledge from this.
That's a big idea. It's not a new idea because
No, it's not new.
But it is an idea that's taking more space now
Yes.
because the world needs more knowledge coming from other ways, art and practice and tradition and all of that. You're right.
But I think that relates directly to what you were just saying of the two different humankind. Is that we've actually learned a lot. And that I think in the indigenous world, I don't mean to romanticize this, but I think in the indigenous world there are still traces of a totally different knowledge and relationship to the world. And I think we're just beginning to willing to listen to that in our Western culture. Certainly in Canada, I feel. Yeah. So I think, you know, there might be a nice connection.
And I would just totally agree with that, and just say that something I specifically mentioned, this Roman division between domus and silva, simply didn't happen in other cultures. It didn't happen in a lot of more tribal cultures, if you want to call them that. And so they don't see themselves apart from nature because there is no nature. There's no word for it. There's nothing else there. Everything is just, and it doesn't mean that they don't sometimes exploit nature, or that they, you know, we can't romanticize, but I mean, there's various things that happen, like some native peoples in North America died because of local ecological catastrophes they caused. And we know this through the historical record. So, like, you know, it's not all peaches and cream, as we might say. But that's why I'm reading more and more anthropology. Because reading anthropology, people who actually give you huge detailed treatises on these peoples, you learn the most insane details. I mean, you could make art projects for the, like if you could have 30 children, they could all have a career making art projects off what you could get out of one
Assuming you
book.
believe the point of view of the anthropologist. Thank you very much. We will see you at the reception and tomorrow and the day after. Thank you very much. Thank you both panelists. It was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.